The world's on fire. Our river's gone dry. The rich are getting richer. They've left us out here to die. Mass migration. We got no place to hide. Who's against us? Who's on our side? Are they too dumb or are they just in on it? Liars and cheaters, a red-hot grip. Ditch the gaslighting gas bag that speaks in code. He's a faker, a shaker, a pontificating pantload. In this house of mirrors, we've hit the wall before it's too late. Let's go. Come on, y'all. It's border to border and coast to coast. It's real, it's facts, and it ain't no hoax. It's Podcast by George, and it's showtime, folks. Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to a Podcast by George. Folks, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just like stated in that intro, we're going to be talking about the PBG Big Three, and it always is climate, war, and healthcare. And it is amazing and tragic the way those three things intersect, and we're going to be all over that in today's show, because coming on the Podcast by George LiveLine, a returnee, and one that I really like, one that I'm really honored to have on the show, folks, and it is Marcy Winograd on the LiveLine. Now, Marcy's a longtime anti-war activist. She's with CODEPINK. She served as 2020 DNC delegate to Bernie Sanders and co-chairs the foreign policy team for Progressive Democrats of America, a member of Veterans for Peace's Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. Marcy's activism began in high school when she marched against the Vietnam War. Yeah, babe. And later she joined the defense team of Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg. Yeah, Marcy has the bona fides, as they say. She is the real deal. She's a truth teller, and she's coming back on Podcast by George. And you know, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is something that I think I'm going to talk about on every Podcast by George. Climate. As the great Lee Camp says, every conversation should start and end with it. I'm thinking about every show of mine starting and ending with it. And the wars are all intersecting with this climate issue. And it couldn't be more prominent. You know, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. I was listening to Alice Cooper's radio show the other day. My God, Alice Cooper was talking about climate change, climate catastrophe. We've got to talk about it, and I know our guest does. And of course, she wants to talk about the impact of the wars and the situation in Ukraine. She's just authored a great piece. That's kind of ironic. That's kind of a pun intended. The title of which I think is The Missing Piece in Ukraine. But let's bring her on in and say hello, hi, how are you? And good morning to our good friend, Marcy Winograd. Hi, Marcy.
Hi, George. Great to be with you and your listeners today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, it's really a big deal. And let me see if I can, I want to bring this article up on screen and show people. Now, this is all at codepink.org. I mean, you can go there and you can find all of this stuff. And this is the title photo: Negotiate, Don't Escalate, Peace in Ukraine. And before we go any further, I just got to ask you, that photo, Marcy, do you know where that originated? And who is the girl in the pink coat? This looks like some kind of a refugee situation. Do you know where this came from?
I don't know exactly, but we do know that millions of people have been displaced in Ukraine internally, externally, having gone to other countries as a result of this Russian invasion, though we know the fighting did not begin on February 24th, and I'm sure we'll get to that later. But yeah, all this massive displacement, it's heartbreaking, really.
Yeah, and it's like nobody saw this coming. Honest to God, this is war, folks. This is what always happens. This is what I talked about before Ukraine, before Russia even invaded. We're going to get to that a little bit later on too. But let's get into this article authored by Marcy, because she not only is a peace activist, and she's a wordsmith too. And we're going to get to that. I really like the way that this thing is written. But it says, we cannot call for peace in Ukraine while simultaneously supplying that country with advanced rocket systems and missiles that could lead to a direct war between the U.S. and Russia, the world's most heavily armed nuclear nations. We're going to tear this apart piece by piece, Marcy. And I tell people on my show all the time that every word matters here. Every writer thinks about every word before they write it, obviously. A couple of things here jump out at me. And one of them is this advanced rocket systems. Now, this made a little bit of news, but it kind of just, went over the transom and people just forgot about it. But I've pointed out on my podcast recently with some peace activists and people that understand what's happening here. These rocket systems have the ability to fire hypersonic missiles at Russia, giving Russia, and they're not supposed to, but if they do accidentally or maybe on purpose, Russia has 5 minutes to respond. Russia could make the wrong decision. They could think that it's a nuclear weapon fired at them. They've got to act in 5 minutes, and they could respond in kind. These missile systems are a big deal, Marcy.
Yes, they are. And as you pointed out, we're really risking nuclear war with these advanced rocket systems. We're risking a direct war with Russia, no longer a proxy war. This is a recipe for global annihilation. I don't know how else to put it. Scientists say that in a nuclear war between the United States and Russia, 5 of the 8 billion people on Earth would be wiped out. People say, well, we can't let Russia hold the nuclear sword over the rest of the world. We can deal diplomatically with one of the most heavily armed nuclear nation in the world. Ultimately, George, we all have to sign, every nation on the face of the earth has to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons so we can eliminate all of these weapons. However, we're not there yet. The United States and Russia both refused to sign that treaty, and NATO is the largest institutional opposition to that treaty. One of the reasons why I am vehemently opposed to NATO.
Yes,
so until that time, we have to be, we have to live in the real world. It's a lot better to sit down and talk than to conduct some bizarre experiment with the human race.
Yeah, and as Marcy mentioned, these treaties all went wanting. I mean, Trump purposely refused to negotiate and tore up treaties. That Iran nuclear deal is pending. We've got to get to that. And these other treaties, I don't know why they're still sitting on the table, but they could be at least a temporary salvation for us all or our destruction. One thing I want to point out here that Marcy brings up, she's talking about this death toll. What would happen if nuclear war were to break out? And there are people talking about it, for God's sake, like it's something that might and could and maybe even should happen. Yeah, all those people are going to die that Marcy was talking about. A lot of people stand back and say, well, hell, we all got to die some way, someday. Yeah, but you don't want to die this way, folks. You don't want to die in a nuclear winter. You don't want to die with the aftermath of a nuclear war. That is not the way anyone wants to end their life or see their children or grandchildren die. We're not even off the first paragraph here. Let me get going here. So the Department of Defense recently announced it would send nearly $3 billion more in weapons assistance to Ukraine. I think that's gone up even since then. And Marcy writing this a few weeks ago. The White House news of the largest Ukraine arms package yet. Rockets, drones, beware the drones, folks. They're coming to a neighborhood near you. If we can use those drones there, they can use those drones here. When Marcy and I were kids, we were concerned about Russia attacking with nuclear weapons that we had first. Now nuclear weapons are bristling all over the world. That's what will happen with drones. 350,000 rounds of ammunition, Marcy says, was drowned out by President Biden's announcement to cancel federal student loan debt for almost half of the country's 43 million debt-saddled people. So while our nation debated whether U.S. citizens should be burdened with huge predatory interest for seeking an education, predatory weapons of war were given the green light for Ukraine, even though there's no accountability for who will receive those weapons, including the neo-Nazi Azov Battalion, an official wing of the Ukraine military. And Marcy, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's almost like stepping out on a ledge. Nobody wants to talk about those damn Nazis in Ukraine, but they're a factor. They're a reason that Obama didn't give those missiles to Ukraine that Trump refused to for political reasons. They've since been given to them, and they have a lot to do with why we've got a war in Ukraine right now. I tell people, and they kind of look the other way. They don't seem to understand. 30 million Soviets died at the hands of the Nazis in World War II. The fact that they've got these Nazi battalions in Ukraine, again, like these missile systems that we just spoke of, it's a big deal.
Yes, it is a big deal, George, and it's a fact that is often glossed over, as you mentioned, and no one wants to validate Vladimir Putin's position in invading Ukraine. And that's not what we're doing at CODEPINK. We're very clear in our condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the bombing of infrastructure, hospitals, schools. It's horrific. That being said, we know that there was fighting, as you mentioned, in the eastern end of Ukraine, in the Donbass region, for years, ever since 2014, when the United States supported and helped engineer a coup of a democratically elected president who was friendly toward Russia. So we have to put the brakes on this. Where is this going to go? Anybody who is a peace-loving person has to be calling for diplomacy. Well, others will say, look, Ukraine has scored tremendous victories on the battlefield. Yes, in certain parts of the country, yes. In other areas, no. This could be a protracted war. It could, as a result of miscalculation or intention, lead to a nuclear war. It's also very dangerous. Why not step back from the brink and say, okay, let's sit down and see what we can negotiate. Now, the Biden administration will tell you, well, Russia doesn't want to negotiate. That's what I hear all the time. Russia refuses to negotiate. To me, this is a mystery. We know that Secretary of State Blinken met with his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, to discuss the basketball stars being held prisoner in Russia.
Yep.
I hope she is released very soon. The question I have is why were they exclusively discussing that? It was almost as though Blinken put on a big billboard, we're only going to discuss this. We're not going to discuss this war that's raging in Ukraine that is jeopardizing the entire globe. We're looking at the potential for global famine in the Middle East and Africa, dependent on the breadbasket of the world, Ukraine and Russia, for the grain they harvest. As you mentioned, we're looking at further climate degradation. What happens when you demolish infrastructure, when you're fighting and all this shelling and everything? Hey, you are exponentially increasing greenhouse gas emissions. So there is so much at stake here. We got to step back from the brink. I read this morning that President Biden will be meeting with the leader of South Africa to discuss how to end the war in Ukraine. South Africa has taken a neutral position. There are a lot of countries in the global South that do not want to endorse these sanctions against Russia for a myriad of reasons. Among them, perhaps they do business with Russia, or look at Israel selling arms. Or perhaps because they don't want to be victimized under these sanctions. They don't want to see skyrocketing inflation. Whatever the reason, the whole world is not on board for this. We need a diplomatic solution. And in that vein, I am the coordinator of the Peace in Ukraine Coalition. There are dozens of organizations involved. You can find out about us at www.peaceinukraine.org. And we are at the tail end of our week of action, George.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yes. So this week of action has involved contacting our Congress members, the State Department, the White House, delivering letters, hosting rallies in front of Congress members' offices. I'm going to do that today in Santa Barbara, California, in front of our Congressperson Salud Carvajal's office. It's a rally to say we want diplomacy, negotiation, not escalation. Send that message to Biden and do not wait another second.
Yeah, Biden is the linchpin. I mean, he controls the levers on this, and he is not being held accountable for it. I like what Marcy was talking about. The cynics will look at it, but they're being proven right every day. They'll look at that and say that this war in Ukraine is supporting the military-industrial complex, the military-industrial contractors, and as Matthew Ho has pointed out on my show, the Green Party candidate for Senate out of North Carolina, is a big new Brzezinski, coined that term about getting at the soft underbelly of Russia by promulgating Afghanistan. Well, that looks a hell of a lot like what we're doing in Ukraine. And to Marcy's point, she talked about Biden meeting with South Africa. When I hear that kind of stuff, I'm like, South Africa? What the hell? Why isn't he meeting with Russia? Would be a good choice. Here, Marcy, I'm going to play this film clip. Now, this is me and Steven Semler was speaking security. He was a guest on my show. This is something that I said before the war broke out or just as it broke out. And I'm standing by this. Watch this. And I know I'm a simple man and I put these in too simple of a context, but I would like for him to come out and say, I was going to sign this bill for $40 billion for more war and weaponry for Ukraine. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to spend $4,000 on a hotel bill on the Ukrainian-Russia border. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to invite Zelensky and Putin to join me. And we're going to settle this thing. We're at the very least going to get a ceasefire. Instead of giving these guns and these weapons for more war in Ukraine, I'm going to take this new approach, this new tact. I'm going to see if this works. If it does work, Joe Biden, you'll win the Nobel Peace Prize. You'll get the Democrats reelected resoundingly in the midterm elections. And then you can turn around and say, that gun thing that I was talking about that we got settled in Ukraine, I want to address that here in the United States as well and see if we can't get some people to do something about weaponry and guns in our country, because I was able to accomplish that in Ukraine. So, Marcy, is that too simplistic in your mind?
I know that sounds very reasonable to me, George. Yeah. What would it take? $4,000 for a hotel bill to have lunch, bring some people to the negotiating table. I'm often hearing you can't negotiate with Putin. It's ridiculous. We need to fight this to the last Ukrainian.
Yeah.
People don't realize the implications of that statement, which I discussed earlier in terms of the risks involved with the entire world, but also this idea that you cannot negotiate with the leader of Russia. Look, since the start of this war on February 24th, Ukraine and Russia have negotiated grain exports out of the Black Sea. They've negotiated an international inspection of a nuclear reactor. They came very close to signing a 15-point peace deal back in March. Had Boris Johnson, then the leader of Britain, not shown up to say, hey, stop.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. That's pretty amazing. Yeah.
On our friends in NATO, United States being the dominant member of NATO, we will give you all the weapons you want for an unlimited decades-long war. No need to sign a peace agreement. And here we are today. And the longer this war drags on, the harder it is to bring to a close based on evidence of other wars and negotiations. So time is of the essence. I'm asking everybody who is listening, who is watching, to contact your congressperson, your House representative, your senator, and say, we don't want to spend more money, billions, on weapons for Ukraine. We don't even know where these weapons are going, as you mentioned, George. The Azov Battalion, this is a neo-Nazi paramilitary organization that was incorporated into the Ukrainian military, their National Guard. And if you don't believe me, look at the flags they wave. They have swastikas on them.
Yes.
What?
I know. And the point that I make to people, they don't, some people have discredited this what if analogy, but it holds true here. 30 million of those Soviets, as I mentioned, died in World War II, much more at the hands of Nazis than us. Here they are with Ukraine and these Nazis in there that we're arming. And what if Mexico were to suddenly say, we've decided to cozy up to ISIS and Al Qaeda, and we've decided to provide them with some arms here in Mexico. How do you think the United States would respond to that? Well, that's the same way that Russia responded. I mean, war is never right, but there is such a thing as logic, and there is such a thing as provocation. And that's what we're talking about today. Let me get back to Marcy's article, because I want to get to the end of it, particularly because I love the way the thing ends. But let me bring this up on screen here and see if I can get this. Here we go. Click this button and bring this up. Okay, so it ends with that thing about the Nazis that we were talking about, that paragraph. But we cannot call for peace in Ukraine while simultaneously supplying that country with advanced rocket systems. Now, that's what we talked about. That could lead to a direct war between the U.S. and Russia, the world's most heavily armed nuclear nations. A new study estimates that a nuclear war, as Marcy had said, would kill 5 billion. That's with a B, folks. Over 60% of the human population, 360 million burning up in the immediate aftermath, the rest dying from starvation and a horrible death during a dark sub-zero winter. We must step back from the brink. How, Marcy says? Well, ultimately, the U.S., the nuclear states, and all NATO countries must become signatories to the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, We talked about the treaties, and in the short term, we must support an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. A ceasefire. That's kind of, I talk about this all the time, Marcy. I am flabbergasted, shocked, and appalled that we haven't even been able to have a ceasefire in Ukraine by this point, except around that nuclear power plant that was at risk. I mean, what the hell? Why can't there be a ceasefire again to give the envoys, send in Biden to negotiate peace on this thing?
I had a meeting with somebody who will not be named here, who was in a powerful position in the House, who opposed a ceasefire. Why? Because went the thinking, we want Ukraine to take back more territory and to fight to the last Ukrainian, basically, that anything short of that is appeasement. A ceasefire, yes, absolutely, right now. Stop this suffering and the killing. This is a call that we should all be making right now. Get on the phone, 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. Ask for your senators, your House representatives. Say you want a ceasefire now in Ukraine. This is a no-brainer. Instead, we are endlessly fueling this war and enriching, as you mentioned, George, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, all these military contractors. In fact, I just read that Zelensky, he's not going to bother with the White House or with Congress. He's going to go straight to these war profiteers, the weapons manufacturers, in a few days and meet with them directly. And he also has an initiative underway to privatize hundreds of companies and industries in Ukraine. And at the top of the menu for invitations to seize assets in Ukraine and to attract further investment is the military industry, militarism. He's reaching out to defense. I never like to call them defense contractors because we know these are war profiteers.
Yes.
Come on over to Ukraine,
All right.
We're not members of NATO yet.
Hopefully
never. But you can be in Ukraine, and we're going to make our arms industry even more robust. So this is the message that's being sent. We have to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is insane, right? All of this is crazy. We should be fighting to thwart global warming, to stop this climate crisis in its tracks, to do whatever we can. This is the real existential threat, as well as nuclear war. Instead, come on over, guys, from Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, set up shop in Ukraine, and we'll just keep exporting arms and fomenting war around the globe. This is crazy.
He opened the stock exchange. I mean, he's ringing the bell, folks. I mean, we're talking big business here. It's war a go-go. That's what we do in the United States, bigger and better than anything else. It is by far our biggest export, death and destruction and military weaponry. And I'm glad you brought up Zelensky. He needs to be taken, maybe not apart, but be held more accountable and looked at more closely. Marcy, I have Sergei Tagnarendo on my podcast from Ukraine. He's got an apartment in Kiev. He's on regularly. He's a musician, and he's surprisingly kind of pro-military. So I kind of dance around him a little bit, but he's no fan of Zelensky. And the fact that we have people that are such fanboys and girls of this Zelensky dude in this country, and that our media is leading the cheerleading for this guy again, to me, is shocking and appalling. Okay, well, back to the article here. Now, Marcy mentioned this. If Ukraine and Russia can negotiate grain exports, prisoner exchanges, and an international inspection of a nuclear plant, they can reach a negotiated settlement. Yeah, they can do this. They're doing those other things. The more weapons we send, however, the less incentive there is to sit down and talk. Why? Well, we got the weapons. We just saw it here in this past week with this big win, although it's debatable, that Ukraine had in that section that had been held by the Russians. This is a self-promulgating, a self-fulfilling promise, and that's what's happening. Without the U.S. and NATO fueling the war with more weapons, a settlement might have been reached months ago, perhaps as early as last March, when Turkey brokered a deal scuttled at the last minute. Okay, I want to bring this up on screen here very quickly because I've got this, and Marcy's well aware of this. This was reporting in antiwar.com, and she covered this briefly, but Russia, Ukraine tentatively agreed on a peace deal back in April. Boris Johnson arrived in Kiev not long after the talks and told Zelensky not to negotiate with Russia, saying the West wasn't ready to sign a deal. What? Boris Johnson, that nut from the UK that's been run out of office, basically, he was the quintessential lame duck at this point. And that guy is determining the world at war? Yeah. Russia and Ukrainian officials tentatively agreed on a potential peace deal during negotiations back in April 2022. Now, this is not often reported. You're not going to see this on CNN, MSNBC, or maybe even Fox, according to a foreign affairs article by Fiona Hill and Angela Strent that cited former U.S. officials. The article reads, according to multiple former senior U.S. officials we spoke with in April 2022, Russian and Ukrainian negotiators appeared to have tentatively agreed on the outlines of a negotiated interim settlement. The terms of that settlement, they're what everybody's been talking about all along, folks. They would have been for Russia to withdraw to the positions it held before launching the invasion on February 24th. In exchange, Ukraine would promise not to seek NATO membership, which they neither need or prior to this, I think, wanted, and instead receive security guarantees from a number of countries. So, what Ukraine would do is they wouldn't join NATO. They wouldn't be left defenseless, running around naked out there on the southern border of Russia if they're concerned about geography and border lines and that type of thing. They would be able to get alliances with other nations, just not NATO, because Russia had had enough of that. I mean, my God, they had signed an agreement decades ago saying NATO would not move east of Germany. And now they're on the border of Ukraine. And people don't talk about this stuff. The tentative deal was the result, and I highlighted this, Marcy, in-person peace talks. Look what happened when we had in-person peace talks. Russian and Ukrainian officials held in Istanbul at the end of March. That's what she was talking about. Virtual talks resumed after the meeting in Istanbul. I didn't know that. The two sides ultimately failed to reach a deal. A major factor in the failed negotiated settlement was pressure from the West, according to a report from Ukrainska Pravda. And if you don't believe Ukrainska Pravda, that sounds like some kind of Russian mouthpiece. Oh, my God, that sounds red. I don't believe in that. Okay. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson urged Ukrainian President Zelensky to stop negotiating with Russia when he visited in Kiev on April 9th. A major factor in the major negotiated settlement was pressure. Oh, that's the same slide. Okay, let me move past that. Now, Johnson appeared to confirm the Ukrainska Pravda report when he told French President Macron in May that he urged Ukraine not to negotiate during his visit in Kiev. And okay, so let's bring Marcy back in here. There's a lot of influence. There are a lot of things going on behind the curtain. Biden in the United States takes a lot of blame, NATO, but the UK, and I know the CODEPINK is active in UK, the UK and its officials, the parliament over there, they've got blood on their hands too, Marcy.
Absolutely. And shortly after Boris Johnson told Zelensky not to reach a peace deal with Russia, we saw our own Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, announcing that we're in this to weaken Russia, which is really code for regime change, right? So it wasn't just Boris Johnson, and enough already, right? What does it take to pick up the phone? And when people say, well, you can't negotiate with Putin, or Russia's not interested in negotiating, what I respond with is, well, what are we offering? Are we offering to remove any of the nuclear weapons we have installed in 5 NATO countries? Are we offering to remove these anti-ballistic missiles that have been installed in Poland and Romania that with some software revisions could be used offensively or be used as a cover in a first strike? When you look back at history, the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was about 10 at the time, showing my age here.
Me too.
When you look back at that, you say, oh, okay, how did JFK resolve that? How did he step back from the brink? He stepped back by offering to remove, which were removed for a while, missiles from Turkey and Italy. I don't think he wanted too many people to know that was the offer, but In
Nobody
exchange
knew
for
it.
that,
Yeah.
we didn't know, but we know now. In
Yeah.
exchange, the Soviet Union removed their missiles, their nuclear missiles from Cuba that were aimed at Florida. So let's make a deal.
That's the point. That's a negotiation, and that's a quintessential example. The precedent has been set for everything that we're talking about, ending the war in Korea, in Vietnam, in um, Iraq and Afghanistan. You got to send in the envoy. Remember Warren Zevon, Marcy, the envoy. He had a song. People go look that up on YouTube. You got to send these people in. Who's the top envoy of the United States? Oh, that would be Joe Biden. That's how these things get resolved. But make a deal. Marcy's talking about negotiate. How do you negotiate? Everybody's got to get something. That's the way that it works. That's how you settled these things. That's what Russia got in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it wasn't even reported hardly because of the hero worshiping that used to go on here with journalists and, Camelot and even John Kennedy and his brother Bobby, who I'd liked at the time I got on. But we didn't know about that kind of stuff. Everybody wanted to just think that, by God, Kennedy stuck it in Khrushchev's face, No. Khrushchev got something too. Let me, we're running out of time with Marcy here. I want to get to the end of this because, and the article is a lengthy one. Go to codepink.org and you can read this. But the last paragraph is where this wordsmithing takes place that I really like. And, I like to consider myself a bit of a writer, a little bit of a wordsmith, but this is really cool, Marcy. I like this. The solution must be a diplomatic one centered around reparations and debt forgiveness for Ukraine, release of U.S. sanctions in return for Russian concessions, semi-autonomy for the Donbass. Yeah, at least semi-autonomy. Most of those people want to be a part of Russia. I mean, what the hell? I mean, that was what the coup in 2014 was like. Go back and read, as Roger Waters says. I mean, don't just sit down in front of the TV and watch this talking head crap at night. Read some of the history about what's going on in Russia and in Ukraine, and guarantees that Russia will not join NATO. The possibility to end the war in Ukraine starts with the missing piece, diplomacy. That is the missing piece. We've covered all of this other stuff. Everything else is, there are weapons and money pouring into Ukraine that we can't even keep track of, for God's sake, Marcy. But there's a missing piece. It's diplomacy.
Yes, that's right, George. And to empower those who are with us, I would say speak up, step up, shout, show up at your congressperson's office, at your senator's offices, show up at a State Department office. They're all over the country. If you're on Twitter, social media, send messages, hit the street, let people know, this is wrong. This is furthering destruction of the entire globe. It's not just about Ukraine. It's not just about Russia. It's about all of us. And somebody once said to me, Marcy, these crimes happen with the consent of the governed. Maybe that consent is manufactured because of all the propaganda in which we are immersed. But at the end of the day, we allow what's happening. It happens with our consent. So let's not consent to the demise of the human race. Let's step back from the brink and say, negotiate, do not escalate in Ukraine.
No, that's well said. And, I started off by putting on screen the big three from PBG: climate, war, and healthcare. And I mentioned how these things all intersect. Now, I want to get to this very quickly because I feel guilty holding Marcy. But the thing of it is, she talks a lot in this article about how the climate, this catastrophe that's going to get us all, folks, I think quicker than what we think. It has a lot to do with the military. I want to bring this up on screen. These are the U.S. military bases that now ring the planet. 850 of them I've circled up there at the top. This is who we are. The largest institutional polluter, Marcy points out in her article, is the United States military, larger than a hell of a lot of countries. I think it ranks about 40th among countries. The U.S. military is. And Marcy, when you look at this map, here's the thing that I'm always struck by. Russia has 20 military bases, most of them in former Soviet republics, I think, where they were before the USSR up, and they're continuing them. China has won. And these things are filthy. I mean, they not only do they kill a hell of a lot of people, obviously, with their intended mission, but because of climate as well.
Yes, and what we really need to see is integration of the anti-war movement, the peace movement, with the climate movement, because
Yes.
as you mentioned, they're linked. Militarism fuels this climate crisis with all of these bases flying thousands of troops here and there and maintaining the bases themselves, 750 to 800. This is exponentially increasing greenhouse gas emissions. We have to cut the Pentagon budget. We're looking at a 2023 proposed military budget of $860 billion, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
and meanwhile, about 19% of our population is struggling to meet its basic needs. 100 million people are in debt. And here we are just hurling money at the Pentagon. So let's speak up. Let us be heard. Say no to endless war. Say no to this military budget. And yes to diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's the easiest way to think about how we're denying ourselves to militarize and blow up the planet, basically, and ruin the climate. Is that reporting that said 1/3 of the COVID deaths in the United States could have been prevented with Medicare for all, or a single payer healthcare system. A third of those people didn't need to die. My God, 1 million people have died. Do the math. I mean, we're talking 300,000 plus deaths because we can't afford Medicare for all, which, as Bernie Sanders and others have pointed out, would actually save not only the government, but taxpayers' money compared to our current healthcare system. It's a money saver. It's a money maker. It's a lifesaver. Okay, so I'm going to let something come between Marcy and I. These are these PBG fast facts that I like to go through very quickly, and we'll go through these. Marcy, you can jump in any time here. Deadly heat waves are sweeping the world, and devastating floods in Pakistan have just killed over 1,000 people while displacing over 33 million people. Now, Marcy, I know Code Pink was all over this situation in Pakistan. This has not gotten the coverage and gravitas that it deserves. This is biblical, folks.
It is. And Code Pink has been raising money for the people in Pakistan impacted most severely by these floods as a result of the climate crisis. And I do want to note, excuse me, that a lot of the money we're spending on weapons to send to Ukraine for a long war was money that was supposed to be earmarked for the global South. The U.S. had made a commitment. It was, you call it reparations, because we have our endless consumption, gratuitous consumption, has disproportionately impacted the global South. And we recognize that. Our government recognizes that. And we had pledged reparations, but instead that money is being denied countries like Pakistan, other countries in the global South, because we are instead sending all these weapons to Ukraine.
Yeah. The connection between war and climate change is self-evident. Oil is the leading cause of interstate wars, and the U.S. military is the largest industrial producer of greenhouse gases. We talked about that. Congress needs to take action, but the National Emergencies Act exists for a reason: to take rapid action in emergencies. Our rapid approach towards 1.5 degrees Celsius, which we are going to blow by, folks. It looks like we're not even getting close to this, of global warming, certainly is an emergency. Talk about this National Emergencies Act, Marcy.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that we are in an emergency, in a crisis. Wildfires, I'm in California, they're sweeping California. People are having a hard time breathing in certain areas of the state. We see floods, hurricanes. What is our priority here? Is our priority to bolster weapons manufacturers, to bolster the arms industry in Ukraine? Or is our priority to thwart the climate crisis? We know the Democrats have been held up to some extent, right, by Joe Manchin. There's this dirty side deal, which
Oh my God,
oppose, that says, you know what, we'll spend $40 billion a year for the next several years to thwart the climate crisis, while we greenlight all of these permits for more oil drilling and fracking.
It's called a suicide pact.
You, Joe Manchin, a gift because you're invested in this, and let you do whatever you want on indigenous lands. This is crazy. And people will say, well, in order to get the Inflation Reduction Act that Chuck Schumer had to promise Joe Manchin this dirty side deal. You know what? Make a better deal. That's what I say. What I would say to Chuck Schumer is, here's the deal. Offer Joe Manchin and do it very publicly. Go to West Virginia and say, we will fund a transition from the filthy coal industry to green industries at prevailing union wages for the next 5 to 10 years.
Can be done.
Take that deal.
Yes. Well said. Okay, so to spin through these now. Okay, then that's exactly what Marcy was talking about in this fast fact. I got one more here. Now, these are from CODEPINK. President Biden must act now if he's truly interested in peace for people and planet. I don't know. I'm a cynic, Marcy. I don't know that he is. I mean, you got to look at the evidence, and the evidence just is not there. I don't know that he really. I don't know if he's too dumb or if he's in on it. CODEPINK says there's a petition we can sign demanding Biden act now. Marcy, that petition is at codepink.org.
Yes, and please, everyone, you're listening. After this, join us at codepink.org and do join me and my co-host, Medea Benjamin, another co-host, Hania Jodat. We host CODEPINK Congress the first and third Tuesday of the month, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And we focus on foreign policy and connecting the dots between foreign and domestic policy. We cover a lot of issues. Our next CODEPINK Congress will focus on unfreezing Afghanistan's assets, and they're now being transferred to a Swiss bank. What happens after that? We have to follow the money, rejoin the Iran nuclear deal, end these sanctions against Cuba, take Cuba off the list of state sponsors of terrorism. This is ridiculous. So many people are suffering. There's a lot we can do, but we need more people engaged to follow U.S. foreign policy. So join us at CODEPINK Congress. You can sign up at codepink.org/CODEPINK Congress.
That's great. And that's Marcy's world. Now, I'm criticized the United Kingdom and England and their role in NATO, and that's legit. But not everybody's asleep at the switch in the UK. This is going to be the last asset that I'm going to have on the show, Marcy, just as we close out here, because I love this. You've got a comrade in arms. I mean, this is great. I know maybe Marcy knows this person personally, but this is something that's making its way around the Twitter sphere that I thought was great. Watch this video, folks. This is Claire Daly in Parliament. Watch this.
Onorevole Daly, ha facoltà di replicare.
Thanks, colleague. I would love colleague Jambaski to tell me any circumstance in which NATO has played a productive role or delivered peace anywhere. History has taught us that sanctions do not end military conflicts. They do not bring peace. They make the people suffer, not the oligarchs, the people of Russia, the people of Europe. And they're not going to help save lives, because the more arms you pump into Ukraine, the more the war will be prolonged, the more Ukrainians will die. And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm afraid, Mrs. Daly, we've given you the opportunity to reply. So let us try and stay calm.
Marcy, I can't, I don't know how we improve on that. My God, we need more voices like that. I mean, that is absolutely outstanding. Yes. That is stellar.
We love Claire Daly.
God.
We need more Claire Dalys. Let us all be Claire Daly.
You can follow her on Twitter and follow Marcy and Medea Benjamin and CODEPINK. I've had those URLs up on the website. We've talked about them throughout the show. We're out of time here today. I got to tell people, we started this at 8 o'clock in the morning, West Coast time, for Marcy to come on here. So again, I really appreciate it. I do want to give you the last word, Marcy. Anything you want to say here in closing to promote your cause, or anything that we haven't talked about that's top of mind that we should have? wrap it up here for us.
Sure, George. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I really appreciate it. I would say to those who are listening, you are powerful. Okay, we're coming up on an election year, a midterm election. Those who are in power are very aware of public opinion. I ask that you, after listening, get on the phone, call your House and Senate representatives, 202-224-3121, and say you want to hear them publicly support a negotiated peace in Ukraine, support a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. Let's hit the street. You know where your congressperson is. If you don't, you can find out easily enough. Get a few friends together, go to the State Department, hop on social media, send out a message of peace. They need to hear from us. We need to be loud and make a lot of noise. And then do join us at codepink.org. And
Well,
also
how about
visit
this?
our Peace in Ukraine Coalition website. That's,
Yes.
excuse me, www.peaceinukraine.org.
Now, what about this strategy that I put forth? It would apply to Republicans as well as Democrats, but we're about to be, and we currently are being inundated with these phone calls from the political parties to support candidates, raise money. That's what they really want. They want your vote. They want your money. What if you tell them, no, I'm not unless you do what Marcy says, not unless you do what Code Pink says. Tell me that you're going to do these things for to prevent war and climate catastrophe, or I'm not going to give you my money any longer, particularly if you've been a donator in the past and they are kind of counting on your money, whatever it might be. Well, $20 to, 20,000, whatever the case might be. If you say, I'm going to withhold that unless you get off your ass and do something like Claire Daly or Marcy Winograd, for God's sake, I ain't giving you any more money. What do you think of that strategy, Marcy?
I like that strategy. Sure, money talks. Why should we give our hard-earned money, dollars, to those who are just going to vote continuously for larger and larger military budgets to foment more violence around the world? We shouldn't be party to that. I agree, George.
That's great. Well, we'll let you go. Thanks again. We'll circle back. I want to get you back on the show as often as I can. I know your time is very limited. Marcy Winograd, thanks again for coming on this podcast by George LiveLine.
Thank you, George. My best to you and all of your listeners.
Thanks so much. And folks, if you like Podcast by George, and if you like seeing people like Marcy Winograd, somebody with the bona fides, as I call it, somebody that goes back to, my God, the Vietnam War demonstrations. She was working on the team with Daniel Ellsberg. She's worked with Bernie, and she continues to work for peace around the world, and along with Medea and Code Pink. Subscribe to Podcast by George. You'll get to see her when she comes on, and we'll do it again here very soon. You can subscribe on YouTube, ring the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment. On Facebook, all you got to do is like us, and you'll be notified when the live streams release. And then, of course, go to podcastbygeorge.com, podcastbygeorge.com. All of the platforms are there. If you just want to get audio, just click on the iTunes or the Spotify platform badges there. Deezer, any place like that. And of course, you can get the audio right there from Libsyn on podcastbygeorge.com. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.